How does fear change our perspective? This is the core question that has been at the heart of development and story of a game called Hoofprints. Developed by Busy Games, Hoofprints is a side-scrolling 2D game which follows the journey of a foal separated from its herd, how he grows into a stallion, and how fear molds his world until it doesn't. The premise itself captured me, so I took the chance to ask the developer some questions about this up-and-coming game, and the more I learned about it, the more intrigued I became. I had a lot of questions for the developer, so we're going to be going over some of those answers and perhaps see where this game is heading. Now keep in mind this video is about a still in development game from a very small team, so please remember that visuals and even gameplay might change. Let's get into it. What is Hoofprints about? I would say it is a small story about a big abstract subtext. First and foremost, it is about growing up, about how life experience gradually changes the way we perceive the world. Things that seem frightening and incomprehensible in childhood may reveal themselves from a completely different perspective over time. Hoofprints is, in a way, a wordless fairy tale. We explain almost nothing directly. The player only sees events, the characters' behavior, and the consequences of their own actions. We deliberately avoided building the story around one specific moral. We wanted every player to take something personal from it after finishing the game." End quote. It's a fascinating premise, and the team attempts to show this journey through three perspectives: foal, adolescent, adult. The developer says the game is rooted in personal experience, a love of nature, and especially a love of horses. I really like the idea of conveying emotions without words, which is why the main characters became animals. Some characters also have very personal sources of inspiration. For example, the personalities of two characters were partly shaped by our cats, Lilu and Luna. Their playfulness, habits, mannerisms, and certain funny reactions helped shape the personalities of the main character and their sibling. End quote. The development of the game seems driven by emotion rather than grandiosity, story instead of features, and already it is plucking at my heartstrings. A foal in a forest, I really want to guide it through and see it complete its journey. But now, what is the story about exactly? The developer answers. At the beginning of the game, we meet a small frightened foal that accidentally becomes separated from its herd and finds itself in a completely unfamiliar forest. To the foal, this world feels enormous, dangerous, and almost hostile. It is scared by shadows, strange sounds, unfamiliar silhouettes, and even other animals. Since the game is still in active development, we continue to fill it with new events, scenes, and interactions. However, the main idea of the story has already taken shape. It is a story told not through dialogue or text, but through the relationship between the characters. These relationships gradually reveal the nature of the world and show how the main character changes. The developer continues, as the player progresses, they will meet the inhabitants of the forest, who may seem threatening at first, but over time, it becomes clear that not everything is as it appears at first glance. As the foal changes, so does its perception of the world, which means many scenes take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of later experience. The developer further explains that taking this particular approach with no dialogue was quite difficult. When there are no dialogue or textual explanations, every frame starts to work like a separate line of dialogue. We have to pay very close attention to lighting, composition, animation, sound, and even the pace of the characters' movements. End quote. This immediately brought to mind, for me, games like Journey or Limbo, where we as players learn the story and meaning in the world by what is happening. Although I can imagine the difficulty of making these games, they often stick with players far longer because we cannot mindlessly move forward. By design, the game must draw us in so that it makes sense and we can interact with it. Limbo, I believe in particular, was a small indie title that landed with a bang and inspired countless indie games to develop for experience rather than scope. Its use of light was often praised, and this led me to inquire more about the visuals. The visuals for the game are stunning, and the developer says the art was done by, and I quote, "one person and a computer mouse instead of a graphics tablet," which I have to admit is quite the feat. But what caught my eye specifically was the lighting. I mentioned Limbo before, and the splashes of light in the dark brought back that little game from memory. Upon asking about it, the developer said this: "Light is one of the most important tools in our storytelling. It helps guide the player, highlights important details, and creates the emotional mood of each scene. For the little foal, light also represents safety, where everything is visible. The world no longer feels quite as frightening." End quote. They also make it clear that despite the angle of fear, this is not a horror game. Although it might be eerie, it is not designed to be horrifying. Even the survival elements will not be harsh nor unforgiving, nor will it be violent. An excellent example of this is the game I'm playing in the background, which partly inspired Hoofprints. Kingdom Classic. It's a free game on Steam about building up your own kingdom. While playing it, I noticed that although there was no direct horror elements, the game still carried an eerie sort of atmosphere. But we've danced around the topic enough. Let's hear what they have to say about gameplay. They say the gameplay itself will be fairly simple. Left and right movement with some jumping and some hidden paths for extra exploration. Although there will be some platforming, the developer makes it clear that the movement supports the adventure, but it is never the main challenge. The story will be the driving force of the game, but exploration, observing animal behavior, finding safe places to sleep, and learning to understand the forest is what your character will be doing. And although exploring is part of the game, collectibles and achievements are not the goal. The developer says, the greatest reward is a deeper understanding of the world, its inhabitants, and additional story details. End quote. Befriending forest creatures is another key element. The developer states that each animal has a personality, a story, and a different way of interacting with the world. They want to show that trust is built by shared experiences, not just pretty words. But our main way to interact with the world will be through our scent-based ability. This is used to find food and avoid hazards. I thought the game could lean towards a more puzzle-oriented experience, but my assumption was wrong, as the developer explained. Puzzles are not the foundation of the game, although there will be some mini-games and interactive situations. During development, certain mechanics may still change, but scent will remain an important part of the game throughout all 3 acts. What is interesting is that its meaning will gradually change along with the main character. End quote. They also say there won't be levels, not in the traditional sense. Instead, the story will be divided into 3 major acts, the 3 stages of the main character's life. In every act, there are events and story beats you will take part in over days that will shape your journey and prepare you for the next chapter. They aren't sure exactly how long the game will be, as the project is still in active development, expanding the world with scenes, interactions, and story beats, so length is still undetermined. But finally, let's dive a little more into our main character. Now, the character is a pre-designed one, so no full creation for the game, unfortunately. The animations, the developer says, were also quite tricky to get right. The process included a lot of videos analyzing movements, anatomy, gait frame by frame to get it just right. But it wasn't the animation, the behavior was also carefully considered. They explained that to convey the personality, they had to sit down and figure out horse behavior. And because they decided to cut dialogue, those animations and environment have to do very heavy lifting to ensure the story is still conveyed. There is also a second foal in the story, which is the sibling, but I'm sure we'll learn more about that when the game is finally released. As for the finer details, the developer explained that the game is being developed in Unity. They are 3 people strong and have been working on it since February of 2026. They had hoped to release it for the Horse Game Steam Fest, but the game bloomed into something bigger, and so they held back to make it something special. Plus, and this is a big plus, they do not use any AI. This is a brilliant start, a small-scale game for a small team with a steady, realistic pace and no AI in sight. The final thought the developer left me with was this. Perhaps the greatest fear is born when we do not understand something. We want the player to see by the end of the game how the world changes when you stop looking at it through fear and begin to see it through experience. It is so rare for horse games to really stand out. We have tons of them with sprawling open worlds and in-depth game mechanics and breeding. But in my experience, indie games often capture something special we often overlook in large games. Emotions or moments we step over in larger games because our eyes are pinned to the horizon. In smaller games, developers can take the time to tell intimate stories, like how a foal learns to be brave.